So today I want to talk to you about another one of my very favorite plants named ginkgo. Has anybody ever heard of the ginkgo before? All right, a couple, yeah. So ginkgo, the Latin name of ginkgo is Ginkgo biloba. And I'm gonna try to do this whiteboard function today. See if this will be useful for people. So the Latin name is Ginkgo biloba, and it's one of my very favorite plants for all sorts of reasons, but especially because it is known as a living fossil. So why do they call it a living fossil? That's because it is one of the oldest plants that we have ever heard of, or that we've ever found. Sorry, trying to find the right picture. Bloop. So I'm going to show you this picture of what I mean. So this here is a Ginkgo biloba leaf fossil. And it's an example of what I mean when I say living fossil. And that's because the ginkgo tree is the only species in its particular Latin class, almost all the way up to the very top of its order in Latin, right? It's the only surviving species of this particular plant family that has been around for about 270 million years. It's been around for a really long time. I see someone has raised their hand, or were you maybe just figuring? Sarah, I'm going to unmute you. Maybe you can ask a question.
Yes, I actually saw a ginkgo. Isn't it an animal too? I could have sworn that was true.
That it was an animal too?
Yeah, I heard of the ginkgo tree or something, and I heard a ginkgo animal.
Oh, interesting. I have never heard of a ginkgo animal. Maybe I'm going to look that up after our class today. I didn't realize that was you, Jaden. I couldn't see your face. So I have never heard of a ginkgo animal before. I think Elliot has a question.
Maybe it was like a gecko?
Maybe. Might have been a gecko. I'm not sure. Ginkgo is perhaps the name of like a common name of an animal, and maybe we can look that up towards the end of the class. I've never heard of that, but it might be like a particular variety or something. So I'm going to show you a couple of the reasons why I think this is one of the most amazing plants. Besides the fact that it's the only surviving species of a particular family that's been around for 270 to 300 million years, like this tree has survived through some of the the giant extinctions that killed off all the dinosaurs and all of that. It's still around. It's like really, really amazing. It grows very, very slowly. So it's this kind of like, I think of it as this like dinosaur tree, and it's like this ancient old thing that just survives for a very, very long time. And one of the reasons that it survives for a really long time is because of how slow it grows. So I want to show you a picture of a particularly giant tree that is 1,400 years old. And come on. So many screens. There it is. So this right here is a tree that's 1,400 years old. It's what it looks like in the fall, in the autumn, when its leaves are dropping off of the tree. So these trees, when you see them in the wild, or if you see them planted in someone's yard, or sometimes they're planted on trees, they're really very common street trees in cities. In the autumn time, people generally recognize them because of a few reasons. So one is because they have these beautiful bright yellow leaves that fall to the ground, usually all at once. So within like 1 or 2 or 3 days, every single leaf on an entire tree will fall to the ground, and it will go from being huge and completely covered in this beautiful yellow color to being completely naked and having all of those leaves on the ground. This 1,400-year-old tree is gigantic. I want to see if I remembered to save the other picture that gives you an indication of even how much bigger it is than everything else around it. Yes. This is in China, this tree. So this is a view of that same tree from above, this 1,400-year-old tree from above. It's planted in the courtyard of a Buddhist monastery. And you can see how big the tree is in comparison to all the buildings around it and all the other plants, the other types of trees and things around it. It's just gigantic. It's magnificent. And the people who planted it there 1,400 years ago and everybody since have been taking care of this tree as if it's a member of their family. They really, really respect it. They really care for it, and they honor it. And I think that that's something that's very wonderful, the relationship between the people who live in this place and this particular tree. And it gives me hope for the kinds of relationships that other people all over the world can have with their plants, with their favorite plants. So after 1,400 years, this tree is this large. It's very healthy. And but it's also taken a very, very, very long time for it to get to its full size. And in contrast, I wanted to show you a funny thing that I found while I was looking up pictures for a class today. There is a particular variety of this tree. So people over time have grown it and have chosen particular genetics for this tree for various reasons. And one of the someone who really likes this tree found particular genetics to help it stay very small in this particular way that they call it a dwarf tree. So when you hear the word dwarf when referring to a tree, it's a tree that stays pretty small in comparison. Lots of fruit trees are dwarf trees, and this is a picture of a very adorable tiny dwarf ginkgo tree that has this funny little toy man next to it, that was grown in this particular way so that it can kind of grow to its full maturity and put out these really tiny adorable little leaves. And it's at full maturity when it's only 3 feet tall. So this is very, very small, but it can be anywhere from like 3 to 10 feet tall, and will still be fully mature. And it's just really adorable. And it's for someone, somebody could have it in a tiny pot, even if they live in an apartment and actually don't have a backyard to plant a ginkgo tree. This is one way that you could have a ginkgo tree, is by getting this funny little dwarf variety. That I think they call Spring Bloom, I think is the name. Jaden, you have your hand up. I'm gonna unmute you. You have a question?
Yes, it is super small. And do you have any idea what kind of genetics it might be able to make?
So what I mean by that is that when these plants are grown from seed, so most of the time ginkgo trees grow from seed, and I'll show you a picture of the seeds. Well, this is a picture of a seed that is actually it's actually been roasted. But this is the inside of the ginkgo fruit has a seed inside of it, and inside this hard shell is this seed that becomes the new tree if you plant it. So that's usually how we get a new ginkgo tree. But when you're planting a particular tree to get a dwarf, it's usually through a process called grafting. So, for example, with grafting, I'll put that word in our whiteboard. If I can, there we go. There it is. So grafting is a particular type of planting new trees or getting new trees that are exactly the kind of tree that you want, by taking a piece of a mother tree or a parent tree. So for example, say someone found a really tiny tree, this dwarf tree in the wild, and they were like, wow, why is this tree, this ginkgo, so much smaller than all of the other big ginkgos around it? I want to have a small ginkgo like this for my yard. They would take a very tiny piece of a branch of that particular mini ginkgo tree and put it onto a type of roots for ginkgo trees that are also very small. And those two ginkgo trees actually can kind of meet in the middle and fuse their skin, their bark, so that they become one tree that's really tiny, and then they can be grown out. People who know how to do plant breeding can continue doing that process. They have roots for this tiny ginkgo tree that they plant out, and then they take other types of ginkgo trees and they kind of merge them together. So we can do a whole, grafting is kind of complicated to talk about. And I think it would probably be a good idea if we did a whole lesson on grafting on another day so that I can have a lot of different pictures for you. I think that pictures would be helpful, and it's hard to talk about grafting if I don't have the right pictures. So Jaden, how about within the next like week or so, we do a class just on that? Cool. So, let's see, what else? I want to talk a little bit about, I'm going to show you the different parts of the ginkgo tree, and then we can talk a little bit about how people use the ginkgo for food and medicine. Elijah, you have your hand up?
Yeah. My uncle, when he was little, a kid, he planted a pine tree in my grandma's backyard.
A pine tree?
It's been there for 30 years.
Cool. That's awesome. Yeah, see, that's like one of those examples of having a really great relationship with a plant, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's wonderful.
We had to cut it down.
What'd you say?
We had to cut it down because it was about to fall.
Oh, it was gonna fall?
Yeah, it was going to fall on our shed.
Sometimes, yeah, well, sometimes that happens. Maybe they get sick, or some trees don't live as long as other trees. Like not all trees can live to be 1,400 years old, like that ginkgo I was showing you pictures of. Sometimes they don't live, nearly that long. It's cool that it lived for 30 years and that it was there. That's pretty awesome. I have a ginkgo tree in my backyard that I grew from seed, and I've had it for 3 years already. I think maybe four years actually, and it's only, it's probably about 3 feet tall, and it looks like a super little tiny, silly, like scraggly thing. It's like barely a tree, and it's 4 years old, but I like it a lot because I grew it from seed all by myself, and that's in my backyard. So I'm going to show you a picture of these botanical drawings that I've been sharing with you in some of our classes. This here is a drawing of all of the plant parts of ginkgo. So this is what the leaves look like in the very early spring when they're green and they're tiny, right? And then throughout the season, they grow out and they get bigger, and they have these beautiful fan shapes. So they're very unique leaf shape that look like fans. A lot of people like to make art like to draw these leaves. They make like jewelry out of them. I've seen ginkgo earrings, and they're very, very popular plants, especially among the creative community too. And in the fall, they turn this beautiful golden color, and that's when they become especially medicinal, and I'll talk about that. There are separate male and female ginkgo plants, ginkgo trees. So there's there's boy trees and there's girl trees, and you need to have both of them in order to be able to get the proper pollination to then get the fruit. And this here is the fruit. A lot of people have, well, so among you, not many of you have heard of the of ginkgos before, but one of the reasons why people know about ginkgos, especially in cities, is because they refer to them as stinkos in cities a lot of times, because their fruit, when they are ripe and in the fall, when they fall out of the tree with the leaves, they look like this. They have like this kind of orangey, squishy stuff that gets stepped on or run over by cars, and they actually smell really pretty bad. People in cities really don't like them at all because of that smell, because they get run over. And I mean, they smell like, people compare them to a lot of different things. Sometimes I think they smell just kind of like throw up. It's like not a good smell at all. Other people will say probably worse things. But what most people don't know about those stinky fruits is that if we would just harvest them, if we would just pick them up off the ground, we could eat them, and they're really, really yummy, and they're really, really good for us. So one of the things that I try to do every fall, usually in November. Oh, you have a question, Elliot? Sure.
What is the fruit called?
What's the fruit called? I don't know. I mean, I just call them ginkgo fruits. Some people call them ginkgo nuts. I don't know if they have a special name other than just calling them ginkgo fruit. But they, is it because you think you've seen them before with by a different name or something? No, you're just wondering. So they, oh, yep.
Is it just the male ones that are stinky?
Actually, the trees that produce the fruit that stinks are actually the females, the girl trees. They are the ones, so in order to produce the fruit and the seed, that requires female parts, female tree parts. Kind of just like female humans are the ones that make the babies. The seeds are essentially, the fruits and the seeds of the trees are the babies of those trees. They will be baby trees if you plant them in the ground, right? Does that make sense? Jaden, you have a question? Oop.
Oh, sorry, I accidentally had my microphone already unmuted.
It's
sorry.
Okay. Question.
Yeah, I had two things.
Mm-hmm.
One, does it taste anything? And second, I actually figured out how to raise the hand like online.
Oh, that's.
All you have to do is just go to the chat and then click on your name, and it'll have you like rename yourself or raise your own hand.
Good. That's a good tip. Thank you.
Yeah.
So your question was how, what do they taste like? So I'm going to show you a picture of, let's see. This is a picture of a woman. Last November, I hosted a ginkgo nut and medicine making gathering in Philadelphia. And this is a woman putting salt over the ginkgo nuts while we were roasting them over a fire, right? So I'm going to go through the whole process so that you understand. And well, I'll tell you how they taste first. So They taste, well, they're kind of nutty. There's a part in the center of them that are a little bit bitter. So the middle of the seed that looks like this one that I showed you already, the very center of this green seed, this is a roasted ginkgo nut. And in the center of it, if you cut it down the middle, there's a thing in there that they call a stem. And that little stem in the inside can be a little bit bitter. It doesn't bother me, but some people make desserts with ginkgo nuts, and they take that center stem out, that little bitter part. They take it out when they're making dessert with it because they want it to be sweet and not have that kind of bitter aftertaste. They're a little bit, as you can see here, they're shiny and they're like a little bit squishy. Not quite, they're like a little bit like Jello, but like not quite that squishy. And if you put salt on them, they just kind of taste like a dried, like a salted nut, like something else that like something you were used to. There's a chat. Oh, how do you cook it? So there's a few different ways that you can cook it. Like that photo that I showed you, roasting it over the fire is one way. So this is a cast iron pan that we put the nuts in, and they eventually start to, like, you put the lid on it and they eventually start to pop, almost like popcorn, and then you know that it's ready. And they pop, and then that green nut is exposed in the middle, and then you eat that green nut. You can also boil them, which is kind of the same process, but you boil water and you put the raw nuts in the inside, boil them for a little while. You can dehydrate them. So if you have a dehydrator, that takes all of the moisture out of them so that they are preserved longer. That's another way that you can do things. I have found dehydrators at thrift stores before, like at Goodwill. I have a couple of dehydrators for fruit and for leaves and other like herbal things that I do. You can roast them in the oven, like just like you would roast, like I roasted them over the fire. You could also roast them in the oven. Something important, I'll show you this picture while I'm talking about the next thing. So this is what some of mine looked like after I roasted them in the oven. I put salt on them, and this is just what they look like when they're cooked. So one of the things that's important to know when you're harvesting the nuts is that some people, I'll show you this picture. Just so you know the difference. So these are the fruits, and those nuts that I've been talking about, the seeds, are inside these fruits. This is like the flesh on the outside. When you're harvesting and pulling the seed out from this fruit is not edible. You don't eat this fruit. It smells really bad anyway. You're not going to want to eat it. And some people actually have a slight allergic reaction to it because do you remember when we were talking about poison ivy last week, or those of you who were here? So poison ivy has the oil in poison ivy is urushiol, which I can put in our whiteboard here. It's a fairly common oil. Urushiol. Oh, come on. Well, there it is. Very disorganized whiteboard. So urushiol is a type of oil that poison ivy has that is what makes us itchy and gives us the rash. So that same oil is present in much, much smaller quantities inside the ginkgo fruit. So some people who are really, really allergic to poison ivy can also get itchy rashes when they touch ginkgo fruits. So what I do is I wear gloves, kind of like when I'm harvesting stinging nettle, which we also talked about a couple weeks ago. Stinging nettle stings you. I always wear gloves when I'm harvesting it. When I'm harvesting ginkgo nuts, I also wear gloves until I get the flesh off of the seeds and I get them ready to cook. Eliana asks, can they get overcooked? Yeah, they can get overcooked. I have dehydrated them before. I've taken all of their moisture out before, and I have over dried them to the point where they got really hard. So at that point, I mean, you could put them back in water. Like some people, they're especially, ginkgo nuts are especially common in Asian cuisine. So these trees, ginkgo trees at this point, are native to East Asia. So like I showed you that 1,400-year-old tree that is in China. That's where they originate from. And there are lots of people in Eastern Asia that still use ginkgo nuts a lot in various cooking. And there are recipes that you can find that are like in Asian food recipes that have a lot of like ginkgos added to soups, ginkgo nuts made into various desserts, like dessert porridges and stuff like that. Baron, did you have a question?
Would you recommend them?
Like, would I recommend eating them?
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. I think that they are kind of like, have you heard the term like an acquired taste? So I think that they're something that is not like other things that you've eaten, most likely. I think that they taste different than a lot of foods that we are used to eating. But I also think that they are tasty. I think that you get really used to them. And I think that they're super nutritious. They're really, really good for us. And I think that putting new foods in our diets, new nutritious plant-based foods into our diets is really, really good for us. So I think that trying this sort of thing and seeing whether you like it, trying it in different recipes and that sort of thing is a really, really good idea. And it's fun, you know, it's like, it's a way that we can interact with the earth. We can interact with various types of things that we're not used to through food. One of the other things that is super cool, and one of the things that's most commonly used that even people in the US know about very commonly, is using ginkgo leaves in tea and as medicine. So I'm going to show you this picture. Oh, there's something in the chat. Where did the chat go? There it is. Can you cook it on a grill? Yeah, you can cook it on a grill. So that's essentially what I did when I showed you the roasting. If you were cooking it on a grill, I would probably put it in like aluminum foil or something so that they didn't fall down into the fire. But that's a good question. So these leaves, when they start to turn yellow in the autumn, they are considered their most medicinal. And ginkgo leaves are often harvested for tea and to make various medicine with, and in adults especially, and older adults even more so, it's very helpful. Ginkgo tea and ginkgo leaf medicine is very helpful for memory loss. So it helps people whose various parts of our brain as we age start to kind of break down a little bit, and we lose memory. We have trouble remembering things. We have trouble staying focused, and it's a particular medicine that helps to keep our brain firing and keep our brain healthy. and it's very commonly used. Lots of drugstores have ginkgo for sale all over the US, and I particularly like it as a tea. Ginkgo tea is really yummy, with a little bit of honey in it. And for me, I use it because it also is something that helps. So it helps me to stay focused if I'm like thinking about too many things and I'm all over the place. And some of you as kids might even have that feeling, right? Where like you have trouble staying focused on homework, or you're like always like trying to move from one thing to the other, or you have like such like you have crazy energy and you're like running all over the place and you're bouncing off the walls. Ginkgo is something that kind of helps to like calm us down a little bit and help us to stay focused on one thing. And there are some people who have been, some scientists who have been researching whether it can be a good replacement for kids who have ADHD or ADD or that sort of thing. So it's like that, it does that sort of thing for our brains. And it's also just really yummy and helps to do lots of other good things for our bodies. They have antioxidant properties, and they are really good for our blood vessels and that sort of thing. So maybe not necessarily something that you all would need, you kids would need, but it's really cool to know about. Probably good for your grandparents, and that sort of thing. Something that you just learn about and keep in your back pocket for, when you're talking to your grandparents or older people in your lives. And it's definitely not bad for you. So if you just have that just in its leaf form, in leaf tea form, it's be a good little boost. Anybody have other questions? No other questions? I think Jaden, I think you're frozen, so I can't see if you have a question or not. Oh, there you are. Let's see. Oh, I can tell you a little bit about, I'm going to show you this last photo. So this is a photo of the same tree that I harvested from last November, where I had my harvest party. This is what it looks like when this tree lost all of its leaves after one night. So all of the leaves were on the tree, and then the next morning it just like all the leaves crashed to the ground. It was crazy. And this particular tree where I hosted this harvest party is in Philadelphia. So those of you who live in New Jersey could go visit it. It's in a historic, it's behind what's called a historic house in Germantown in Philadelphia. And this particular tree is the oldest ginkgo tree in the United States, as far as I can tell. I think it's the oldest ginkgo tree that is surviving in the US. And that means that it's a tree that has seen a ton of history. It has seen so many things. It has been through so many things, and it's there, and it's been taken care of at this particular historic house. And the historic house is, it's another funny name, so I'm gonna write it down on the whiteboard here, even though the whiteboard looks really funny. This ginkgo tree is at a place called Grumblethorpe, which is another really funny names here. So Grumblethorpe Historic House is open to the public, I think 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. They have really cool farming programs, urban agriculture programs for kids. And I highly recommend going there if you're one of my New Jersey people. Elliot said, I thought it was yellow when it falls. Well, that's a good question. So this particular tree, this is like 3/4 yellow. These leaves are like 3/4 yellow on the tree that I was just showing you a picture of. And they fell really quickly, probably earlier than usual because of a storm. So there was like a really windy night, and they were like about to fall off anyway. but like they probably wouldn't have fallen if it weren't for that particular windy night. But they will get even more yellow over time, and like as they lay on the ground, they will get even more yellow. Elijah, you have a question?
How old is it? That tree?
How old is it? That's a good question. I forget. I want to say it was planted in the 1700s, but I can't exactly remember. The house is really, really old, and Philadelphia has been there since the city of Philadelphia has been there since the 1700s. I'm about to run out of time. I think I have like less than a minute left. So what do you have? What's your question?
I wanted to say, I'm going in like a month or so. I'm going to California and I'm going on a farm.
Oh, that's awesome. I can't wait to hear more about that.
And I'm gonna go like all over the country.
That's great. That's wonderful.
Go there.
Cool. Well, we can talk more about that in other classes. I'm gonna run out of time, so I don't want to cut you off completely. It's good to see you all today, and I hope that you have a great rest of your day, and I hope to see you tomorrow at the same time. And ask me any questions. I'll see you tomorrow.